All right, I promised you at the beginning we were going to talk a little bit about wills. And for a lot of you, the only estate planning you need to do is a will. Okay, if you have any significant amount of assets, or if you have minor children, especially if you have minor children, you need a will. Right? And wills aren't that hard to do, right? You don't actually even need a lawyer to do a will. There's plenty of online resources you can do it with. And you could even, in a lot of states, you can write a will on a napkin, but you need to understand your state requirements, right? Handwritten wills aren't legal in every state. Like Georgia, for instance, they're not legal there. They often also have to be signed in the presence of at least two witnesses, right? There's no point in doing a will if it's not going to be valid. So make sure you understand your state rules if you try to get super creative about this. But I think it's worth at least spending a couple $100 on an online, will creating software to do this. If not, going to see an attorney, spending a little bit more, and having someone you can ask questions to and to draft up, the most professional looking will you can. But here's the deal. Here's what needs to be included in there. You need an executor. That's the person who's going to carry out what the will says you need to do. You need the beneficiaries, the people that are going to get stuff in the will. And you need to describe how you actually want your assets to be distributed. But perhaps the most important part of the will is to name the guardian, the person that's going to take care of your minor children. And that does not have to be the same person that manages the money on their behalf. In fact, there's a lot of benefit to not having it be the same person. We elected to have it be different people. We chose someone that we thought could manage the money well to manage the money, and somebody we thought could raise the kids well to manage the kids. But I think by having two people involved there, we keep a little bit of checks and balances in the system. You may or may not choose to do that. I'm sure it would be a little bit more complicated for our guardian if they didn't have direct access to the money, but we think that's not necessarily a bad thing. A lot of people will keep a list of their main assets and liabilities in the will as well, but keep in mind that may need to be pretty general, or the will is going to need to be updated more than you may want to do. Here's some things maybe you don't want to put in your will. All right. One is conditional gifts. Okay. If you are only going to give an inheritance based on certain conditions, you probably need a trust, right? And if you need someone to have like a spendthrift trust because you can't trust them with a lump sum of cash, that's better done with a trust than through a will. Don't put anything in there that's owned like property that has a right of survivorship. If that's automatically going to somebody else, it doesn't need to be in the will. Same thing with all kinds of other things that have beneficiaries, like retirement accounts. Your Roth IRA doesn't need to be in your will. Your 401k doesn't need to be in your will. You just list beneficiaries with those accounts. Same thing with annuities, same thing with life insurance policies, right? They don't need to be in the will. They are not going to go through probate anyway. And so you can leave those out completely. All right. You also don't need to put your funeral arrangements or any personal wishes in the will. That can be like an attached letter to the will. It doesn't have to be, in the will itself. You can just have kind of a letter of instruction of what song you'd like sung at your funeral, or whether you want to be cremated or buried. That sort of stuff can be in a letter of instruction. It doesn't have to be in the will itself. But if you got minor kids, you need a will. Don't neglect this. It can be messy if you don't do this. And once you start accumulating assets, you ought to have a will as well. By the time you die, you're probably going to want at least a revocable trust. And you'll need some more complicated estate planning done at some point. But man, if you've had a kid and you don't have a will in place, you are definitely behind the 8 ball. Go get that done today.
The hosts of The White Coat Investor are not licensed accountants, attorneys, or financial advisors. This podcast is for your entertainment and information only. It should not be considered professional or personalized financial advice. You should consult the appropriate professional for specific advice relating to your situation.